Parle Village is located on the site of an ancient Native American village. Spirit Walker was the chief at the time of the Dakota War in 1862. He was not in favor of the war, but went along with it to keep peace with the warriors. Little Crow, the leader of the Dakota during the conflict, once lived in the village and was married to 3 of Spirit Walker's daughters. After Amos Huggins was killed in the Dakota War, his widow Sophia fled with Julia Laframboise and the children to Spirit Walker's village, and was sheltered by him and his family until they were let go at Camp Release near Montevideo. William Mills was the first permanent white resident of Parle County. He staked his claim in 1868 in Section 30 of the county, where he founded a settlement named Bison City. The name was later changed to Williamsburg. The land that was to become Parle Village was acquired by Robert W. Herron from the United States of America on December 24, 1869. By some accounts, this was one of the most beautiful spots on the Minnesota River. Some of the reasons that this site, close to the Parle and Minnesota rivers, was chosen included the lake, rich farmland, several good river crossings, its location on the old Red River ox cart trail, and timber along the river was ample for building and firewood. In 1871, an election was held to determine the location of the county seat. It was between Williamsburg and Parle Village. 39 or 40 votes were cast. It was believed that Williamsburg won, but the ballots were lost on the way to Redwood Falls to be validated. Many people seemed to favor Williamsburg, but the newly elected county commissioners favored Parle, so it became the county seat. The first frame building in Parle County was built as a hotel in 1870. Eventually, the building housed the courthouse, but the space was shared with the post office, which was established in 1871. In 1884, the Minneapolis and St. Paul Railroad Company completed a line through the county, running to the extreme southeast corner. The towns of Boyd, Dawson, Madison, and Marietta sprang up along the railroad. This again raised the question of where the county seat should be located. When the railroad bypassed Parle Village, many businesses and homeowners saw no future there. Some started moving their stores and houses across the prairie to Madison or Dawson. The Parle Press followed suit, moving to become the Madison Press. A few individuals stayed: Dr. O.K. Lindboe, Charles A. Gould, Brownie Nichols, Melvin C. Chamberlain, Gilbert Kivley, and Peter Simpson, who were some of the first settlers in Parle Township. A few small stores remained. The seat of government was a great prize sought in every county. Everyone realized that the village of Parle could be a temporary county seat. When removal took place, it became one of the most colorful episodes in the county's history, stretching from 1885 into 1899. Dawson would make the first move. It was to start something it could not finish. Civic responsibility and spirit grew slowly in a village controlled by absentee proprietors. Dawson's ad hoc partisans were unequal to the Madison townsman-owned company, which planned its strategy in the back room of the Parle County Bank under the leadership of Jacob F. Jacobson and Herbert L. Hayden. Under the county seat removal law of 1885, the removal process was initiated by presenting a petition signed by a majority of freeholders in the county requesting an election to decide upon removal to a specific location. The Dawson Boomers began to circulate their petition in April of 1885. Madison soon did the same. The petitioners were ready when the county commissioners met on July 28, 1885. Herbert L. Hayden, attorney for and secretary of the Madison Townsite Company, presented the Madison petition. The petition contained the signatures of 944 persons, all asking that the county seat be changed from the village of Parle to the village of Madison. On September 22nd, Gorham Powers of Granite Falls and Herbert L. Hayden represented the Madison petitioners at the meeting of the county commissioners. The Dawson petition, containing 756 signatures, was presented as well. The morning was taken up with arguments by counsel on both sides. The minutes are minimal, but one can just imagine the atmosphere. After a noon recess, Commissioner John Engstrand's motion to receive and file both petitions lost. Then Commissioner John J. Daly's motion to receive and file the Madison petition carried by a vote of 3-2. The Dawson petition was not acted upon. The commissioners met again that evening, and also the next day. Finally, by another 3-2 vote, this resolution was passed. This set the course of events. The vote would be taken in the next regular election, and by the clear preponderance of signatures, Madison would win. Madison partisans could thus be expected to be calm, while those of Dawson and Lac-qui-Parle, caught a day late and $1 short, could be expected to be as disruptive as possible. The battle of the newspapers began with the first publication of the auditor's notice of the election, dated July 26, 1886. In his July 30th issue of the Dawson Sentinel, Charles J. Coughlin charged that the names on the removal petition had not been checked, and that people who had so little in the prevailing hard times were going to be made to pay for the aspirations of a group of greedy town lot speculators headed by J. F. Jacobson. Coughlin claimed that the central location was not important and noted that the county treasurer traveled to various points about the county to collect taxes. He advised that the county seat be left where it was and stressed that the watchword was economy. Reacting to various charges, Silas E. Farnham of the Press responded in his August 20th issue. "The Sentinel thinks we are not consistent. Well, Charlie, it all depends upon the color of glasses and the spectacles we wear, you know? A short time ago, the Sentinel editor was in the field with his coat off working for the removal of the county seat to Dawson. His opponents got away with him and Madison got the designation, when all of a sudden he discovers that the removal of the county seat at present is too expensive a luxury to be indulged in by our people. The question of expense in the Dawson removal scheme was not worthy of consideration, but when it came to the removal to Madison, well, in the interest of economy, he thinks it ought to remain where it is. Consistency is a great thing, but a virtue which one had much rather see in another than practice himself." Having nothing to lose, the Sentinel on October 15th tried to arouse fears. It noted that the editor and Lac-qui-Parle proprietor Browning Nichols had visited St. Paul and hired former State Attorney General Gordon E. Cole to fight county seat removal. Coughlin warned, "If the people know when they are well off, they will settle the question by voting against removal. If they do not, they will involve the county in great expense, for the matter will go to the courts and the taxpayers will have to foot the bills." On October 22, 1886, Madison's independent press noted that the only argument against the removal to Madison was expense, but happily that had evaporated. He printed the contract made between the Madison Town Site Company and the county commissioners. The Town Site Company agreed to remove and renovate all county records, safes, the courthouse building, and the jail in work-like manner for a consideration of $1, contingent upon a positive outcome of the vote. Coughlin responded in the October 22 Dawson Sentinel, "No bond or contract is good without a valid consideration, and this the Madison schemers know full well. It is done for the purpose of deceiving the people into voting for removal, and not a man on the bond would be or could be held responsible in any sum whatsoever. If the county seat is ever moved, the people will have to foot the bill, and don't you forget it." On November 2, 1886, the voters of Lac-qui-Parle County cast 1,889 votes on the removal question. Removal was approved by a vote of 1,173 to 716, a majority of 457. While the Madison boomers were crowing, Coughlin extended a quiet and disarming congratulatory message to his Madison counterpart. But even before the canvassing board had done its job, the unhappy Lac-qui-Parle and Dawson partisans had begun preparation for a legal battle. The opponents of removal quickly sought a district court injunction, although such action would have been legally redundant in other circumstances. Judge John H. Brown of the 12th Judicial District was convinced on November 9th that the law should be tested before removal should take place. Noting the arguments, he issued this unambiguous statement. Now, therefore, we being willing that justice should be done in the premises, do strictly command and enjoin you, and each and every one of you, that you do refrain and abstain from removing any of the county buildings, vaults, books or records or offices of said county from said village of Lac-qui-Parle to said village of Madison or elsewhere, during the pendency of said contest, or until the same shall be finally determined in favor of the validity of said election, or from suffering the same or any of them to be so removed, or from doing any other act in the premises looking to said removal. The election results affirmed, Governor Hubbard issued his proclamation on November 11, 1886, that the change of county seat had been affirmed and approved by a majority of the voters present and voting in the election. Jacobson sent a telegram to his business partner, John B. Odeson, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was said to have read, "All okay. Go ahead." Go ahead with what? A decision had been made to precipitously remove the courthouse and the records. A posse was gathered from descendants of the Vikings' bold and German barons, assisted by a little native Yankee blood. The posse may have gone to Lac-qui-Parle in two contingents. Herbert L. Hayden led the group. The first contingent to arrive in Lac-qui-Parle may have consisted of about 100 to 150 townsmen and farmers and about 40 teams of horses. Some of them left Madison at 1 o'clock in the morning on Friday, November 12th, and met up with others at the Leather Breeches farm, halfway to Lac-qui-Parle. The 18-mile trip from Madison to Lac-qui-Parle was completed by 2 a.m. It was a clear, frosty night, and the rumble of wagons could be heard for miles. Yet the removal opponents were taken by surprise. Sheriff Aurelius D. Brown, a close associate of Jacobson, had found pressing business to attend to in Dakota Territory, and was unable to return until a day later. Years later, Silas Farnham told part of the story. Arriving at Lac-qui-Parle, the man having the expedition in command placed a cordon around the entire block of the courthouse site. There was a path leading from the courthouse down to the business portion of the village. In this path, at the end where it intersected the principal business street of the village, was placed a man who held in his hands a double-barreled shotgun. That man was August Kukeritz. Two men, one of them carrying a lantern, came up this path. If memory serves us correctly, these men were John P. Jacobs and Charles W. Page. They were halted, but continued to advance and were again halted, and this time, probably noticing that they were facing a double-barreled shotgun, they turned around and went downtown. While the blockades warned the curious and the serious that they approached at their peril, the movers secured entry into the courthouse and began to pack and load records and safes. Auditor Helvard Steenerson arrived upon the scene at 4 a.m. Asked to open his vault, he refused and warned the movers not to touch it. It was decided to smash the vault, which was constructed of brick. Opponents later charged that a weak-stomached mover vomited when the first blow was struck. As the work progressed, the graceful form of Gilbert O. Kivley was seen here and there, writing down the names of every mover he could see. Melvin C. Chamberlain sought unsuccessfully to stop the removal. The Lac-qui-Parle parties sought to serve injunction papers, were held back by the cordon, but later swore they had served papers on Hayden, who apparently had a hearing problem and temporary amnesia. A second group of movers arrived toward morning to move the courthouse building, which measured 30 by 45 feet and 2 stories high. Frank Davis of Madison, a house mover who had moved buildings from Parle to Madison and knew the land well, was hired to do the job. Brick vaults were dismantled to lessen weight. The courthouse and jail cells were loaded before daylight and started on their slow trip to Madison, a trip lightened by strong drink. Silas Farnham was seen sitting atop a loaded cell, cracking a whip at the mules and whistling Yankee Doodle. It was a quick and successful action, with little violence and no blood, except a little gore which was drawn from the noses of a couple of young fellows who got a little warm in the county seat debate and tried to settle the question in dispute a la Sullivan. The most serious casualty was I.H. Hansen, who was kicked by a mule. Auditor Halvard Steenerson made a mad dash to the nearest telegraph office, where he dispatched this message to Governor Hubbard. The county records are being moved to Madison, and the courthouse is being torn down, while an injunction is served upon the county officers not to let anything be moved. Stop. What shall I do in the matter? Stop. Hubbard's reply provided no comfort to those who knew of the collusion of county officers. The county attorney and sheriff will be able to secure obedience to the law and the courts. Soon afterwards, Steenerson, Browning Nichols, and Charles W. Page sent another telegraph to the complacent, or perhaps just sleepy, governor. Governor Hubbard did not reply, perhaps thinking his first telegram was sufficient. Thwarted, the removal opponents sent a delegation to St. Paul to see the governor in person. On November 15th, Judge of Probate Charles W. Page and Dawson attorney Jeff Batterton called on the governor, who sent them to the attorney general, who gave them the galling advice that they should hire a lawyer to look into the matter. The courthouse kept moving, slowly. As it passed the Parle Lutheran Church on the morning of Sunday, November 14th, one of the parishioners remarked that taking the courthouse was bad enough, but to profane the Sabbath. When the building was within 3 miles of Madison, the falling snow and wind became so severe that the building had to be left on the prairie temporarily. On November 19th, another attempt was made to pull the courthouse those last 3 miles. This time, an axle broke. Finally, on November 26th, the courthouse was brought into Madison at 2:30 p.m., flag flying. Removal was over. Considerable excitement persisted, suitably covered in the press. The New York Times on November 13, 1886, ran this piece: "The County Records Taken. Montevideo, Minnesota, November 12th. At 2 o'clock this morning, the courthouse of Parle County was broken into, presumably by a Madison delegation. The end of the brick vault was battered down and the complete county records taken. The burglar-proof safe of the county treasurer was also taken. The safe is said to contain considerable money belonging to the county. Madison was voted the county seat at the last election. Governor Hubbard received a telegram from the county auditor stating that the records were being removed to Madison and asking for instructions. Governor Hubbard answered, 'The county attorney and the sheriff will be able to secure obedience to the law and the court.'" Browning Nichols brought an appeal case scheduled for the April term of the Minnesota Supreme Court in 1887. The parties signed a stipulation that there would be no damage suits, that the only question would be the constitutionality of the 1885 state removal law, and, should the law be found unconstitutional, the order would be reversed. The Parle County case had become pivotal in the interpretation of the removal law. County residents tend to think their experience was unique, but most counties had a contest of some sort. Even in physically removing the courthouse in the dead of night, the county was not unique, but it was the first to do it. The Minnesota Supreme Court rendered its decision in Browning Nichols v. H. Walter and others on July 25, 1887. For all the legal technicalities involved in the arguments, the ruling was unambiguous. Chief Justice James Gilfillan, writing for the court, declared that Chapter 272, Laws of 1885, was unconstitutional and void because it was in the nature of special legislation and not uniform in its operation throughout the state. The ruling of the district court was reversed. The decision put back county seats in 6 counties. The case was even mentioned in Governor Andrew R. McGill's inaugural address. In the case of Nichols versus Walter, the Supreme Court sustained this objection and declared the law unconstitutional. Therefore, at this time we have no law on our statute books authorizing county seat removals under any circumstances. Reaction in Parle County was immediate. The Dawson Sentinel of July 29th reported, "When the news of the county seat decision reached Dawson, the stars and stripes were run up on several buildings and stretched across Main Street. Several pounds of powder were burned between anvils, and the band played. We understand that Parle also celebrated the event in a very enthusiastic manner. Dr. Collins of Dawson decorated his horse with a flag and rode to Madison to share the good news. H.L. Hayden, it was hinted, had gotten a sudden attack of business to Nebraska." As might be expected, the independent press expressed a sour attitude. In the July 29th issue, Farnham reminded his readers that Madison had honorably fulfilled every point of the law as it had been passed, and now the county would have to bear the expense of removal of records back to Parle Village. Dawson was in a state of temporary insanity. The county officers appeared before Judge John H. Brown on September 26, 1887, at Benson, to answer contempt of court charges. The judge ordered the county officers to resume duties at Parle and directed the county commissioners to provide them with office space. He fined the officers $2 each. To those who thought the fine was too small, the October 14th Independent Press replied, "After all, what greater punishment could Judge Brown have inflicted upon the county officers than sending them back to Parle?" Headlines in the Dawson Sentinel of September 30th, 1887, celebrated the court order returning the county officers and records to Parle. The Parle Village partisans planned a jubilee for September 22nd and 23rd. Dates chosen to conflict with the county fair at Madison. The Jubilee, hosted by Browning, Nichols, and friends, was grandly advertised. There was to be a parade, speeches, 6 brass bands, prizes for agricultural exhibits, horse and foot racing, a large barbecued ox donated by Nichols, a GAR encampment, torchlight parade, and other festivities. Reports on actual happenings are very sketchy, but sponsors claimed that 800 to 1,200 people attended. Jubilee songs with words supplied by local partisans were sung. Mrs. Peter Simpson was a young mother living in Parle Village in 1887. She was part of the celebration taking place in September of that year. Mrs. Simpson, along with her young child and Mrs. Robert Christensen and son, had taken refuge in the house of the milliner to avoid the crowd that had gathered in the village. A barbecue had been erected, and loads of food had been brought in large baskets by the surrounding settlers. By the time they were able to come out to the street to take part in the meal, they found that all the food was gone, and they had to go without. The sponsors of the Jubilee decided to hold one every year at the same time as the Madison County Fair. The aftermath was one of increased bitterness among many of the people of the county. The Parle Village faction instituted various nuisance suits against public officials. The county records were returned to Parle, and office space was rented in Dr. S. G. Miller's former drugstore building. Auditor Halvard Steenerson, in a demonstration of his lack of confidence in the permanence of Parle as a county seat, had his barn moved to Madison in November. There was a lull of nearly a year after the Supreme Court ruling of July 1887. Madison organized for a renewed attempt to obtain the county seat. A man not easily deterred, Jacob F. Jacobson decided to enter state politics and initiate a new county seat removal law. He was nominated for state representative at the Republican County Convention in September. Jacobson's main goal, to make Madison the county seat, was kept quiet, and he enjoyed widespread support even in Dawson. Charles Coughlin of the Dawson Sentinel admired Jacobson, despite their differences over the county seat, and in his October 18th issue, Coughlin endorsed Jacobson, citing his strong temperance record. The Madison ticket had won, and everyone understood the goal never put into print, that Jacobson was pledged, above all, to bring forward a county seat removal law that would secure the county seat for Madison. Jacobson's removal bill was approved on March 21, 1889, but the new fight over the county seat had already begun. As early as February 22nd, the Bellingham correspondent of the Press wrote, "Whoop 'em up, boys. We are in the ring and in elegant trim. It may be a walk away, but we doubt it." Dawson and Lac-qui-Parle had the mutual interest of keeping the county seat away from Madison, but that was as far as their agreement went. It was to be an unhappy relationship. Both Dawson and Lac-qui-Parle agreed to encourage Bellingham, the pawn. The day after the removal bill's passage, both Madison and Lac-qui-Parle gave notice that they would circulate a petition on April 6th. The Bellingham partisans were a week late, but the petition brought by the Lac-qui-Parle partisans was in favor of removal to Bellingham, and the law did not allow simultaneous petitions. Lac-qui-Parle and Dawson editors could not afford to admit that Bellingham was being used, so they had to say something else. On March 8th, the Sentinel quoted a Bellingham correspondent as saying, "Bellingham is situated far enough from both Marietta and Dawson not to interfere with the advancement of either, while Madison is near enough to kill them and probably do us great damage." Frequent predictions were made that Bellingham was taking over Madison's trade area and would soon leave the latter a one-horse town. Madison disagreed. The election of May 21, 1889, gave Madison the county seat by a vote of 1,311 to 420, a majority of 891. The votes were duly canvassed and removal procedures begun. The last of the records reached Madison on May 31st at 10 p.m., after which a celebration dance was held at City Hall. The election had been quiet and anticlimactic, and the celebration was restrained. Although the need for a new courthouse was felt for some time, and Madison newspapers carefully reported everything that went wrong with the old building, the Madison partisans were hesitant to reopen the county seat battle by suggesting the erection of a new courthouse. An attempt would bring on a last-ditch attempt by Dawson to secure the county seat. A grand jury reported that the old courthouse was unsafe for the keeping of public records and was unsuitable for offices for the various county officials, and, in general, appearance was a discredit to the county. The grand jury took a few liberties with the truth. The county commissioners felt it their bound duty to act on the grand jury report, and, accordingly, on July 13, 1898, they passed a resolution presented by John H. Gunter of Madison to implement the recommendations of the jury report, including erection and furnishing of a $30,000 courthouse before the year 1900. For Dawson, the approval of courthouse bonds meant the end of hope for getting the county seat. Meetings were held throughout the county. Again. The Nassau newspaper mused in its November 25th issue, "At their last meeting, the county commissioners decided to build a courthouse. We have not heard where it is to be built, but we suppose that it will be in Nassau." On December 7, 1898, the county commissioners met to view preliminary plans by 3 architects. The following day, they accepted the sealed bid of Buckner and Jacobson for 3% of the building cost. They decided to visit other courthouses and to meet as a building committee. The new courthouse was evidently patterned after the Douglas County Courthouse at Alexandria, erected in 1894 at a cost of $36,640. Madison partisans had their appetites whetted. The county commissioners on April 19, 1899, accepted the bid of Olaf Swenson of St. Paul, to build their courthouse. The various bids coming in lower than expected, the commissioners decided to use the best brick available, Twin City red mottled brick. The trimming was to be of reddish-brown Lake Superior stone, and the roof was to be covered with slate shingles. A grand cornerstone laying was set for June 21st, 1899. Invitations were sent. One was returned, signed Town of Maxwell, retorting, "Lay your own cornerstone." Quite a few old opponents did decide to come. The actual event on June 21st was suitably gala. The day was filled with band concerts, baseball games, luncheons, processions, and of course, speakers. Short addresses were made by John McGuire for the county commissioners, J.F. Jacobson, and the architect. Railroad representatives spoke on the relation of transportation to agriculture. The main address was delivered by Cyrus Northrup, president of the University of Minnesota. The address was followed by a band number, Die Wacht am Rhein, as a tribute to those German immigrants in the northwestern part of the county who had staunchly voted for the bonds. Then the cornerstone was laid. William L. Mills, the traditional first white settler, deposited a metal box in the cornerstone. The contents of the box included views of the village of Madison, a county map, a village map, the contract for the first lot sold in the village, early history of the county, possibly Chamberlain's little book, a statement on public schools, extracts of official records, a list of workmen involved in the building's construction, and the 1899 Legislative Manual, Volume 1, Number 1 of the Lac-qui-Parle Press, Volume 1, Number 5 of the Lac-qui-Parle Independent, and copies of the Independent Press, Western Guard, Dawson Sentinel, Bellingham Times, Minnesota Tidna, Lac-qui-Parle County Vedette, Boyd Bulletin, Nassau Interstate, and the Normal School Echo, program for the laying of the cornerstone, sketch of the village of Madison in 1896, songs by Melvin C. Chamberlain, a photograph of the first bridge at Lac-qui-Parle, and a photograph of 2 court buildings at Lac-qui-Parle. This was all put into a red granite stone quarried in Lac-qui-Parle County and bought for $35. Mills proclaimed the stone laid and dedicated the future building to justice and truth. For a time, the old courthouse remained in front of the new as construction was completed. On November 29, 1899, the commissioners held their last meeting in the old courthouse. On that day, they approved the new building, conditionally, pending the architect's approval. It was a well-built structure, one which the press called a monument to the skill of the builder. It remains a magnificent building, one which, with minor exceptions, is as sound as the day it was built.